everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. The Florida State college football playoff conversation, like that's the biggest thing going on in college football right now. Certainly the biggest thing coming out of Saturday. But I would argue that the single most interesting narrative, the single most interesting conversation actually came out of a matchup of unranked teams. And I don't know if we've ever talked unranked team versus unranked team in mid-November, this late in the year, but how can you not, based on what happened on Saturday afternoon at the cloudy, rainy Los Angeles Coliseum, just about a 20, 25-minute drive down the road from where I live. And it was interesting, right? Because coming into this game, UCLA, the big story was around Chip Kelly. Now, I told you on Friday's show, I said I did not believe that Chip Kelly's job was in as much danger as a lot of people made it out to be. But at the same time, that was the big conversation. UCLA is the underdog. What happens if they lose? What happens to Chip Kelly? All that good stuff. Well, bluntly, we didn't have to worry about that all that much because UCLA put the whooping on USC. Final score 38-20. And I don't know how many people realize this coming in, but I think everybody realizes it now. That was USC's last regular season game of the year. They played in week 0. They had their bye early. They've been playing every single week since October, and their regular season is done. They finished 7-5. The defense is a mess. The O-line is a mess. Caleb Williams is just a distant memory. Thanks for the memories, Caleb. And I'm here to say this. The Trojans are very clearly broken. And I think for the first time, there's real questions. Like, is Lincoln Riley actually the guy to actually fix it? Let's dive in. Let's break it down because this game was wild. And let me say this. Listen, I get all sorts of stuff wrong, so this isn't me patting myself on the back, taking a victory lap. But when I saw the line was USC favored by 6.5, I said, like, what am I missing here? Because you can criticize UCLA for whatever you want. Chip Kelly, you know what? He's not the most personable guy in the world. UCLA fans want more. But the bottom line is this. They won 9 games last year, 8 games the year before. And this year, they've been really solid across the board considering how much they lost. I know they were coming off a loss to Arizona State. I get that it was not pretty. But the defense has been great all year. The run game has been great all year. And they found an answer at quarterback in Ethan Garbers till he got hurt. Well, he was back. He was healthy. And you could see the difference in UCLA and the difference in talent between the team in blue and the team in Cardinal and gold, okay? The final stats in this game were jarring. UCLA wins 38-20, but the bottom line is it gets much, much worse than even that would indicate. UCLA, in the least surprising news ever, if you've watched any USC at all this year, USC gave up about 5.5 yards per carry. UCLA, about 200 yards rushing on the game. Meanwhile, what did I just say about that offensive line? That offensive line for USC, boy, oh boy, was it bad. How about this? 22 carries. Let me make sure I get this right. I want to make sure I get this right. I just want to make sure that I get this right because this is so jarring. I don't even know if I believe what I saw. Final stat line, 3 yards rushing for USC on 22 carries. That comes out to 0.1 yards per carry over the course of this game. Now, I know UCLA's defense is really good. And I know those stats are kind of skewed because Caleb Williams took a couple sacks and the sack numbers count against your rushing yards. But the bottom line is when you rush for 3 yards in any game, that simply isn't going to get the job done, especially when your head coach is supposedly an offensive genius. And so when I look at USC, they finished 7-5. I don't think there's any doubt. They're going to go down as the most disappointing team in college football this year. I mean, listen, Texas A&M, LSU, like, I don't care who we're talking about. There is no one more disappointing than USC. Coming off 11 wins a year ago with the reigning Heisman Trophy winner. They promised us that they fixed things on the defense. And instead, they were way worse. They finished 7-5. And bluntly, I just don't know if Lincoln Riley is the guy to answer this program's problems. Because when you look at this program's problems, a couple things. One, they're really obvious. The O-line is terrible and the defense is terrible, okay? on the season, their season is now done. Now, these numbers will change a little bit because most teams still have one more game to play. But here is where USC finished on the final stat lines. They finished as an offensive line. They finished as the 91st ranked rushing attack. Now, I know Lincoln Riley. I get that there's only so much he can do if the O-line can't block, but 91st ranked rushing offense and 112th out of 133 teams in terms of sacks allowed. And Caleb Williams avoided a lot more sacks running for his life, 112th in yards allowed. So the O-line isn't good. The defense certainly isn't good. They finished the regular season giving up 35 points per game, 124th nationally out of 133 teams, and the 120th ranked total defense. And what strikes me about USC, so we know what the problems are. So that's the thing, right? We know what the problems are with USC, but I don't know what the solutions are, because the solutions that most teams would go to, they're not really an option for USC. Because think about it. What is it if you have glaring holes in certain spots in the modern era of college football? What do? You go to the transfer portal, right? Well, just one problem. USC outside of Colorado has been more aggressive than any team in the transfer portal over the last 2 off seasons. And really, if you go 2 off seasons, they've been by far the most aggressive, because Colorado and Deion Sanders just got there a year ago. Took about 30, 32, 35 guys 2 years ago. Took another 15, 20 this past year. So if the answer is we need bodies, we need depth, we need size, they've tried the transfer portal and didn't work. Well, how about high school recruiting? I mean, Lincoln Riley said, I'm coming to USC because I have a better chance of building a national title contender in Southern California. All those elite high school players, USC, the brand, the song girls, all the Heisman Trophy winners. You know, USC is ranked 19th nationally right now, according to 24/7 Sports in terms of recruiting rankings. And don't tell me, you'd sit there and say, well, maybe there just aren't very good high school players in California this year. I know. Brandon Baker, #1 offensive tackle in America from Mater Dei, used to be a USC stronghold. You couldn't get a kid out of Mater Dei if you wanted him. He's going to Texas. Aiden Breland, #3 defensive tackle, going to Oregon, had offers from Georgia and Miami. USC wasn't even in the Final 5. And so you look at USC, the portal hasn't worked. They're not recruiting the high school ranks. So what is the fix for Lincoln Riley? The bottom line is, listen, I think this guy is, it sounds crazy. Listen, let me say this. I saw like Bill Plaschke, columnist. You've seen him on Around the Horn. He works for the LA Times. He used the word hot seat. Lincoln Riley's not on the hot seat. The school owes him way too much money. But I do think he has to look himself in the mirror. First of all, I don't think the NFL is an option for him. I don't know how an NFL team can hire him after the abomination that he just had this year, because not only is the defense not good, but the offense is not good as well. Now, I do think he has to look himself in the mirror, and I think he's got to ask some tough questions of himself. First of all, he's got to fix recruiting, okay? And we'll get into the style of playing on the field. There is no reason ever for USC to be ranked 18th, 19th in the country in recruiting. I've lived in LA for about 12 years now. I was here for the Lane Kiffin recruiting through NCAA sanctions. Lane Kiffin signed top 10 classes with like 15 scholarships. Everybody else is signing 25, 30 guys. He's signing like 12 to 13, and he still had top 10 classes. Sark, however it ended, was signing elite players. Every player he wanted. Listen, how about Clay Helton? You can criticize Clay Helton for a lot. He had Bryce Young committed. And it wasn't until it was clear that he was about to get fired that Bryce Young decommitted, ends up going to Alabama. And so I bring it up because every head coach at USC has been able to recruit. There is no excuse for Lincoln Riley. And I get that it's a portal, it's an NIL world, it's a collective world. And I understand that USC right now, probably the collective isn't where it needs to be in terms of competing with SEC schools, Big 12 schools, whatever. But at the same time, there is no excuse. And the thing that stands out to me, he's not recruiting Southern California. Top 15 prospects in California, USC has 2 commitments. As I said, #1 offensive tackle in America, going to Texas. #3 off defensive tackle, going to Oregon. They go to Mater Dei in Santa Ana, California. That used to be a USC hotbed. You could not get a kid out of there if you wanted to. It's where Matt Leinart went. It's where Matt Barkley went. It's where Bryce Young went, where he was going to go to USC. So the recruiting has to be better. But listen, I beat around the bush long enough. We got to get to some other stuff. It starts with Lincoln Riley. And don't tell me it's about the defensive coordinators, about fixing the defense. I think it's about fixing the mentality of this program. Because the bottom line, listen, you go back about a month ago, right? After Penn State lost to Ohio State. Remember the conversation we had? We said, I give Ryan Day so much credit because about 3 years ago, they lost to Oregon in the regular season. And Ryan Day basically looked himself in the mirror and he said, we can't keep going on like this. We can't keep putting teams on the field where we have to score 40 points a night to win every single game we play. And so it took time. It took into the offseason, but they hired Jim Knowles. Their defense was much improved last year. Now they have maybe the best defense in college football. And they're going into the Michigan game this weekend. We'll see if they win, but it doesn't change the fact that the bottom line is that for Ohio State, they are a defensive-driven team now. And I'm not saying if you're Lincoln Riley, you gotta be the 85 Bears next year. But it's about a mentality. It's about a mindset. You listen to what Oklahoma fans said when he left. They were right. Every single year that he was at Oklahoma, that they got further away from the Bob Stoops defensive mentality, they got softer. The defense got worse. They gave up more points. It's just the truth. It's just undeniable. There's talk about how he runs practices. You talk to anybody who covers college football, anybody who's around this sport, anybody who knows people in the industry, they will tell you USC, they do not practice the way that Georgia practices, the way that Michigan practices, the way that Alabama practices, the way that Ohio State now practices. I had a buddy of mine who knows college football. He said they're a country club program. They're soft. And like sometimes the LA is soft. Like that's not always true. UCLA football is not soft. UCLA basketball under Mick Cronin is not soft, but USC football, they are soft. And it starts with Lincoln Riley. So I'm not going to go on and on. The defensive coordinator hire might be the most important hire of his life. And I think there's some good candidates. Zach Arnett, the former Mississippi State head coach, is available. Jim Leonard, the former Wisconsin defensive coordinator who played in the NFL, is available. But it really comes down to not just the hire, but the mentality. You have to build toughness. You have to build a program that does not wilt, and you have to build a program, even if it takes time, that doesn't need 40 points a game to win. Follow that Ohio State blueprint, but you got to be better, Lincoln Riley, and that's where I'm concerned. I am really concerned because you're going into year 3. As weird as it sounds, I think you're in a worse place heading into year 3 than you were heading into year 1, because at least year 1, you had Caleb Williams. You had momentum. Next year, what do you have? An inexperienced quarterback, couple nice pieces on offense, and a completely rebuilt offensive line and defense. Lincoln Riley, it's time to get to work.